The morning sun bathed the rolling hills of Napa Valley in a warm, golden light, casting long shadows between the neatly lined rows of grapevines. The vineyard, nestled in a secluded corner of the valley, was a place of quiet beauty, a sanctuary where nature and human effort worked in perfect harmony. Margaret, or Maggie as everyone called her, stood on the porch of her farmhouse, a steaming cup of coffee in her hands, and took in the serene view. The scent of earth and ripe grapes filled the air, a comforting reminder that the harvest was near. Maggie was 45, with a quiet strength about her that masked the years of loss she had endured. She had inherited the vineyard from her late husband, Tom, who had poured his heart and soul into making it a success. When he passed away 5 years ago, Maggie had been devastated, left with not just the burden of grief, but also the daunting responsibility of keeping the vineyard alive. But she had done it. Through sheer determination and countless sleepless nights, she had managed to sustain the vineyard and even grow its reputation in the competitive Napa Valley wine scene. Yet, despite her outward success, Maggie couldn't shake the loneliness that had settled deep within her. The vineyard was her solace, but it also reminded her every day of what she had lost. She spent her days working among the vines, supervising the small team of workers, and overseeing the business side of the operation. Her hands were always busy, whether pruning, tasting, or checking the progress of the fermentation process in the cellar. But when the sun dipped below the horizon and the workers left, silence would creep in, filling the empty spaces of her home and heart. Maggie's best friend, Isabel, had known her long enough to see through the strong facade she presented to the world. Isabel was everything Maggie wasn't: outgoing, spontaneous, and brimming with energy. She had a laugh that could fill a room and a determination that was both inspiring and at times a little overwhelming. Isabel had been there for Maggie through the darkest days after Tom's death, offering support in ways that only a true friend could. Now, as Maggie sipped her coffee and watched the mist lift from the vineyard, Isabel's car came bouncing up the gravel driveway. The sight of her friend brought a small smile to Maggie's face. Isabel never needed a reason to visit, but Maggie could always count on her to bring a little chaos and warmth into her otherwise orderly life. Isabel stepped out of the car, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, and waved enthusiastically. "Maggie, you look like you've been up for hours already. Did you even sleep?" Maggie chuckled softly and set her coffee cup down on the porch railing. "I've been up since dawn, just like every day. Harvest is coming soon, and there's a lot to do." Isabel bounded up the steps and pulled Maggie into a tight hug. "You need to take a break once in a while, you know. This vineyard won't collapse if you rest for a day." "I'll rest when the harvest is over," Maggie replied, though both women knew that wasn't entirely true. Maggie had a habit of burying herself in work, avoiding the quiet moments that forced her to confront her loneliness. Isabel released her and gave her a knowing look. "Well, since you won't take care of yourself, I guess I'll have to do it for you." Maggie raised an eyebrow, curious but also a little wary. "What are you up to now?" "Oh, nothing you need to worry about," Isabel said with a mischievous smile. "Just thinking about how to make sure my best friend has some fun for a change." Maggie sighed, already sensing that Isabel had something more than a casual visit in mind. "Isabel, I appreciate your concern, but I'm fine, really." "Sure you are," Isabel said, waving off Maggie's words. "But a little fun never hurt anyone, right? You've been cooped up here for too long, Maggie. It's time to get out and live a little." Maggie knew that once Isabel set her mind to something, there was little point in arguing. "Fine, but don't do anything too crazy, okay?" Isabel laughed, a sound that was both comforting and slightly alarming. "Don't worry, Maggie. You'll thank me later." As the two women walked toward the vineyard, the sun fully rising above the hills, Maggie couldn't help but feel a slight unease. Isabel's surprises were rarely simple, but she also knew that Isabel's heart was always in the right place. For now, Maggie decided to focus on the work at hand, pushing aside any concerns about Isabel's mysterious plans. The vineyard stretched out before them, a sea of green leaves and ripening grapes. Maggie took a deep breath, the familiar scent of the vines calming her nerves. Whatever Isabel had planned, Maggie knew that this place, her vineyard, would always be her refuge. But deep down, she also wondered if maybe, just maybe, it was time to let a little more into her life than just the grapes and the wine. Isabel's home was a cozy, sun-drenched cottage nestled on the edge of Napa Valley. The walls were lined with eclectic art and photographs from her travels, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the fragrance of blooming jasmine from her garden. It was the kind of place where anyone could feel instantly at ease, which was exactly what Isabel intended. She loved hosting friends, and her door was always open to those in need of a listening ear or a hearty laugh. Today, however, Isabel's mind was occupied with thoughts beyond her usual hospitality. As she sipped her morning coffee and flipped through the pages of the local newspaper, she couldn't stop thinking about Maggie, the image of her friend, standing alone on that vineyard porch with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, tugged at Isabel's heart. Maggie had been through so much, and though she never complained, Isabel could see the loneliness that lingered just beneath the surface. Determined to help, Isabel had started considering a bold plan, one that Maggie would likely resist if she knew about it. But Isabel was nothing if not persistent. She had always believed that sometimes people needed a little nudge to find happiness, even if they didn't realize it themselves. Isabel began her search in the most natural way she knew, by attending the various social gatherings that peppered Napa Valley's calendar. The valley was alive with activity, especially as the harvest season approached, and every weekend seemed to offer a new event: wine tastings, art shows, farmers markets, and charity galas. Isabel made it her mission to attend as many of these events as possible, always with an eye out for someone who might be a good match for Maggie. At first, her search was frustrating. She met plenty of charming men, but none who seemed right for Maggie. There was the wealthy vineyard owner who talked only about his latest acquisition, the dashing sommelier who was more interested in flirting with everyone in the room, and the retired CEO who seemed to care more about his golf game than anything else. None of them had the quiet depth that Isabel knew Maggie needed, someone who could understand the subtle, unspoken emotions that filled Maggie's world. Then, one evening, at a local art gallery opening, Isabel struck gold. She was admiring a landscape painting, its colors capturing the essence of a Napa Valley sunset, when she overheard a conversation nearby. A man, speaking in a soft, thoughtful tone, was discussing the painting's use of light and shadow, comparing it to the way wine develops complexity over time. Intrigued, Isabel turned to see who was speaking. The man was in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a kind face that seemed to carry both wisdom and warmth. He wore a simple yet elegant outfit: slacks, a button-up shirt, and a well-worn leather jacket that suggested he cared more about comfort than appearances. As he continued to speak, Isabel noticed the way he listened intently to the woman he was with, his gaze focused and sincere. There was something about him that felt genuine, unpretentious, and Isabel's matchmaking instincts immediately went on high alert. When the woman excused herself to mingle with other guests, Isabel seized the opportunity. She approached the man with a smile, introducing herself as a local who loved both art and wine. The man, who introduced himself as David Carter, seemed pleased to meet someone who shared his interests. As they chatted, Isabel learned that David was a professor of philosophy, recently relocated from Boston to take a position at a nearby university. He had moved to Napa Valley to escape the hustle and bustle of city life and had quickly fallen in love with the region's natural beauty and slower pace. David spoke with a quiet passion about his work, his love for teaching, and his new life in the valley. He mentioned that he enjoyed exploring the local vineyards, not just for the wine, but for the peace and solitude they offered. Isabel's heart leapt when she heard this. David was exactly the kind of person Maggie needed, someone who understood the beauty of simplicity and the joy of quiet moments. By the end of their conversation, Isabel was convinced that David was the perfect match for Maggie. She knew better than to rush things, though. Maggie was cautious by nature, and the last thing Isabel wanted was to scare her off with overt matchmaking. Instead, she decided to take a more subtle approach, arranging for Maggie and David to meet in a way that felt organic and unforced. Isabel's first opportunity came the following weekend when she hosted one of her famous Sunday brunches at her cottage. She made sure to invite a diverse group of friends, including David, and casually mentioned the gathering to Maggie during one of their regular phone calls. "You should come, Maggie," Isabel said, her voice light and cheerful. "It'll be a small group, just some friends for brunch. You need a break from the vineyard, and it'll be fun." Maggie hesitated, as Isabel knew she would. "I don't know, Isabel. I've got so much to do with the harvest coming up." "Nonsense," Isabel interrupted. "You deserve a little time to relax. Besides, I've made your favorite, blueberry scones. You can't say no to that." Maggie laughed, the sound like music to Isabel's ears. Okay, you win. I'll be there." With the plan in motion, Isabel set about making sure the brunch would be the perfect setting for Maggie and David's first encounter. She arranged the seating so that they would be next to each other, knowing that their shared love of nature and quiet conversation would naturally lead them to find common ground. She even made sure to have a selection of Maggie's wine on hand, knowing that it would give them something to talk about. On the day of the brunch, Isabel couldn't help but feel a flutter of excitement as she greeted her guests. When David arrived, she introduced him to the other guests with her usual warmth, saving the introduction to Maggie for last. Maggie, dressed in a simple yet elegant outfit that highlighted her natural beauty, arrived a little late, apologizing for the delay with a sheepish smile. "Better late than never," Isabel said, pulling her into a hug. "Come on, there's someone I want you to meet." Isabel led Maggie over to where David was standing, chatting with a couple of Isabel's other friends. "Maggie, this is David Carter. He's a professor at the university, just moved here from Boston. David, this is my best friend, Maggie." David turned, offering Maggie a warm smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Maggie. Isabel has told me a lot about you." Maggie smiled back, feeling an unexpected sense of ease in David's presence. "Nice to meet you too, David." Isabel didn't mention she had such interesting friends. As the brunch continued, Isabel watched from the sidelines, her heart swelling with hope. Maggie and David seemed to hit it off immediately, their conversation flowing naturally as they discussed everything from wine to the beauty of Napa Valley. They were both quiet and thoughtful, but with a spark of curiosity that made their interaction feel effortless. Isabel knew she had to be patient, but she couldn't help but feel that this was the beginning of something special. As she refilled her guests' coffee cups and passed around more scones, she caught Maggie's eye and winked. Maggie rolled her eyes, but the smile on her face told Isabel that for once she might actually be enjoying herself. The intrigue had begun, and Isabel couldn't wait to see where it would lead. The annual Harvest Festival at Maggie's Vineyard was a much-anticipated event in Napa Valley. It was a celebration of the season's bounty, a time when the community gathered to enjoy the fruits of their labor and the rich beauty of the land they cherished. Maggie had always taken great pride in hosting the festival, pouring her heart into every detail, from the selection of wines to the lineup of local musicians who would provide the day's entertainment. As the sun began its slow descent, casting a golden hue over the vineyard, the festival was in full swing. The air was filled with the lively sounds of folk music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Long tables were set up under the shade of ancient oak trees, adorned with rustic centerpieces made of autumn leaves and fresh grapes. The smell of roasting meats and fresh bread wafted through the air, mingling with the earthy scent of the vineyard. Maggie moved through the crowd, greeting guests with her warm smile, though there was a hint of something deeper in her eyes, an excitement she hadn't felt in a long time. This year's festival was different, and she couldn't quite put her finger on why. Perhaps it was the perfect weather, or the fact that the harvest had been particularly bountiful, or maybe, just maybe, it was the memory of a certain brunch and the man she had met there. As Maggie made her way to the wine-tasting table, where her team was busy pouring glasses of her latest vintage, she spotted Isabel among the guests, chatting animatedly with a group of friends. Isabel caught her eye and gave her a knowing look, followed by a wink. Maggie rolled her eyes with a smile, still unsure of what Isabel was up to, but grateful nonetheless for her friend's boundless energy. It wasn't long before Maggie found herself at the center of the festival, where the main event of the evening, a wine-tasting competition, was about to begin. She was just about to take her place at the judging table when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Are you participating in the competition or just here to judge?" David's voice was warm and tinged with humor. Maggie turned, her heart skipping a beat, as she saw David standing there, looking effortlessly relaxed in a casual shirt and jeans. He held a glass of wine in one hand, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Just judging," Maggie replied with a smile. "I wouldn't want to put the other contestants to shame." David chuckled, and Maggie felt a warmth spread through her chest. "I'm sure you'd win, hands down," he said, taking a sip of his wine. "Your vineyard has quite the reputation." "Thank you," Maggie said, feeling a flush of pride. "But it's not just me. It's a team effort. The vineyard is as much theirs as it is mine." David nodded, his gaze moving over the vineyard with admiration. "It's a beautiful place. I can see why you love it so much." Maggie's smile softened. "It is. It's a lot of hard work, but it's worth it when you see everything come together like this." For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, watching as the festival unfolded around them. The music played on, and the laughter of the guests seemed to blend with the rustling of the leaves in the gentle evening breeze. Maggie felt a sense of peace that she hadn't experienced in a long time, a feeling that perhaps she wasn't as alone as she had once thought. "So," David said, breaking the silence, "what's the secret to making such good wine?" Maggie laughed softly. "If I told you that, it wouldn't be a secret anymore, would it?" David grinned, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "Fair enough, but I'd love to learn more about it, if you're willing to share. I'm fascinated by the whole process." Maggie tilted her head, intrigued by his genuine interest. "Well, it just so happens that I'm giving a tour of the vineyard tomorrow morning. If you're free, you're welcome to join." "I'd like that," David said, his voice sincere. "Thank you, Maggie." As they continued to talk, Maggie found herself drawn to David in a way she hadn't expected. He was easy to be around, thoughtful, kind, and attentive, without being overbearing. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on everything from the history of the Vineyard to their favorite books and music. Maggie was surprised at how much they had in common, and how comfortable she felt sharing even the smallest details of her life with him. Unbeknownst to Maggie, Isabel had been watching from a distance, a satisfied smile on her face. She knew that the two of them were hitting it off, but she also knew that she needed to keep her involvement hidden, at least for now. Isabel wanted Maggie to discover her feelings for David on her own terms, without the pressure of knowing that it had all been orchestrated. As the evening wore on, Maggie and David moved through the Intrigue festival together, sampling food and wine and enjoying the festive atmosphere. Maggie introduced David to some of her closest friends and colleagues, and they all seemed to take an instant liking to him, further reinforcing the connection Maggie felt. When the time came for the festival's finale, a fireworks display over the vineyard, Maggie and David found themselves standing side by side, watching as the first bursts of color lit up the night sky. The sound of the fireworks echoed through the valley, mingling with the gasps and cheers of the crowd. "It's beautiful," David said, his voice quiet, as if he were sharing a secret. "Yes, it is," Maggie agreed, though her gaze had shifted from the sky to David's face, watching the way the colors reflected in his eyes. In that moment, Maggie felt something stir within her, a warmth, a sense of connection that she hadn't felt in years. She didn't know where this newfound feeling would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she was willing to find out. As the last firework faded into the night, leaving a trail of smoke and starlight, Maggie turned to David with a soft smile. "Thank you for coming tonight. I'm glad you were here." David returned her smile, his eyes filled with a quiet sincerity. "So am I, Maggie. So am I." As they walked back through the vineyard, the festival winding down around them, Maggie couldn't help but feel that this was the start of something new, something she hadn't expected, but now found herself eagerly anticipating. The crisp autumn air carried a hint of wood smoke and the scent of earth as Maggie walked through the vineyard, her boots crunching on the fallen leaves. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the rows of grapevines, and the sky was painted in shades of orange and pink. It was a quiet evening, one of those rare moments when the world seemed to slow down, allowing her to breathe in the beauty around her. Maggie had always loved this time of year, the colors, the smells, the way the vineyard seemed to glow in the golden light. But tonight, her mind was elsewhere, occupied with thoughts of David. Over the past few weeks, they had spent more and more time together, and Maggie found herself looking forward to their conversations, their walks, and the easy companionship that had developed between them. But along with the warmth she felt for David, a nagging doubt had started to creep in. There were moments when she wondered if their meeting had truly been as coincidental as it seemed. Isabel's knowing smiles and occasional hints only added to Maggie's suspicions. She couldn't shake the feeling that her best friend had played a role in bringing David into her life, something more than just inviting him to brunch. As she reached the edge of the vineyard, where the land sloped gently down to a small grove of trees, Maggie stopped and leaned against a wooden fence. She watched as the leaves fluttered down from the branches, twirling in the breeze before settling on the ground. The scene was peaceful, but Maggie's thoughts were anything but. She was deep in thought when she heard the familiar sound of footsteps approaching. Turning, she saw Isabel walking toward her, bundled in a cozy sweater, her auburn hair tousled by the wind. Isabel's expression was warm, but there was a seriousness in her eyes that Maggie hadn't seen in a long time. "Maggie," Isabel called out as she came closer, "I thought I might find you out here." Maggie offered a small smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just enjoying the evening," she replied, gesturing to the colorful landscape around them. Isabel came to stand beside her, leaning against the fence. For a moment, they stood in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Isabel broke the silence, her voice soft and hesitant. "Maggie, there's something I need to tell you." Maggie's heart skipped a beat. She had a feeling she knew what was coming, but she waited, giving Isabel the space to speak. Isabel took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "I haven't been completely honest with you," she began, "about David and how you two met." Maggie's stomach tightened, but she kept her expression neutral, waiting for Isabel to continue. "I'm the one who introduced David to you," Isabel admitted, her voice tinged with guilt. I thought you might need someone in your life, someone who could make you happy, so I arranged for you to meet him at the brunch, and I've been encouraging things ever since." Maggie felt a wave of emotions crash over her: surprise, hurt, and a deep sense of betrayal. She turned to Isabel, her eyes searching her friend's face for answers. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't want to interfere too much," Isabel replied, her eyes filled with remorse. "I thought if I told you, you might push him away, or you wouldn't give yourself a chance to see if there was something real between you two. I just wanted you to be happy, Maggie." Maggie looked away, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. She had trusted Isabel, and the thought that her friend had been manipulating her life, even with the best intentions, stung deeply. "Isabel, I don't know what to say. I don't know if what I feel for David is real anymore. Was it all just because you thought we'd be a good match?" Isabel reached out to touch Maggie's arm, but Maggie stepped back, needing space to process everything. "Maggie, I never meant to hurt you. I just wanted to help. But I can see now that I may have gone too far." Maggie nodded, her mind racing. She couldn't deny the connection she had felt with David, the comfort and joy he had brought into her life. But now she couldn't help but wonder if those feelings had been influenced by Isabel's behind-the-scenes machinations. "I need some time to think," Maggie said, quietly, her voice heavy with uncertainty. I need to figure out what's real." Isabel nodded, her own eyes filled with regret. "Of course, Maggie. Take all the time you need. And I'm sorry. Truly." Maggie didn't respond. Instead, she turned and began walking back through the vineyard, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. She felt as if the ground beneath her had shifted, and she was no longer sure of where she stood. Everything with David had felt so natural, so right, but now she couldn't trust her own feelings. As the evening light faded into twilight, Maggie made her way back to the farmhouse. She was lost in thought, barely noticing the beauty around her. When she finally reached her home, she found David waiting on the porch, his expression warm but concerned. "Hey," David said softly as she approached. "Is everything okay?" Maggie paused, looking up at him. She could see the genuine concern in his eyes, and for a moment, all the doubts and fears melted away. But then the memory of Isabel's confession resurfaced, and the uncertainty came rushing back. "David," Maggie began, her voice hesitant, "I need to ask you something." "Of course," David replied, his brow furrowing slightly. "What's on your mind?" Maggie took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Did you know that Isabel, that she was trying to set us up? Did you know she was behind our meeting?" David's expression softened, and he nodded slowly. "I did. She told me after the brunch, but I didn't think it mattered because I genuinely wanted to get to know you, Maggie. I didn't come here with any intentions other than that." Maggie searched his face, looking for any sign of insincerity, but all she saw was honesty and a quiet strength that reassured her. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner," David continued, stepping closer. "I didn't want to complicate things, especially when I realized how much I enjoyed spending time with you. But I understand if this changes things for you." Maggie's heart ached with conflicting emotions. She wanted to believe David, to trust in the connection they had built, but the doubt planted by Isabel's actions was hard to ignore. "David," Maggie began, her voice wavering, "I just don't know what to think right now. I've been through so much, and I don't want to get hurt again." David reached out, gently taking her hands in his. His touch was warm, steady, and reassuring. "Maggie, I can't promise that everything will be perfect, but I can promise you that my feelings for you are real, and whatever happens, I'll respect your decision." Maggie looked into David's eyes, seeing the sincerity there, the quiet strength that had drawn her to him from the beginning. She knew that the only way forward was to trust herself, to trust what she felt in her heart, despite the uncertainty. "I need some time," Maggie finally said, her voice steadying. "I just need to sort through everything." David nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Take all the time you need, Maggie. I'm not going anywhere." As the night settled around them, Maggie felt a glimmer of hope, a hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find her way through the confusion and uncertainty to something real, something lasting. But for now, she would take it one step at a time, trusting that the answers would come when she was ready to hear them. The days grew shorter as autumn deepened, and the vineyard took on a new beauty with each passing day. The leaves on the grapevines had turned shades of amber, crimson, and gold, creating a patchwork of colors that stretched across the rolling hills. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves and the distant promise of winter. Maggie had spent much of the past week alone, wandering through the vineyard, her mind occupied with thoughts of David, Isabel, and the feelings that had stirred within her. She had always found solace among the vines, and now, in this time of uncertainty, the vineyard was once again her refuge. One evening, as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and orange, Maggie decided to take a walk through the vineyard. She needed clarity, a moment to truly listen to her heart without the noise of doubt and fear clouding her thoughts. As she walked, the world around her seemed to quiet. The rustling of the leaves, the distant call of a bird, and the gentle breeze all felt like part of a larger, more profound silence, a silence that invited reflection. Maggie stopped at a small rise overlooking the vineyard, where the rows of vines stretched out beneath her like a living tapestry. She took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs, and allowed herself to consider everything that had happened. Isabel's confession had shaken her, but now, with some distance, Maggie could see that her friend's actions, while misguided, had come from a place of deep love and concern. Isabel had only wanted what was best for her, even if her methods had been a bit heavy-handed. Maggie smiled to herself, thinking of all the times Isabel had been there for her, through her grief, her loneliness, and her struggles to keep the vineyard going. Isabel had always been her fiercest advocate, her most loyal friend. And now, looking back, Maggie could see that Isabel's meddling had, in a way, led her to something wonderful. David, the thought of him brought a warmth to Maggie's heart, a warmth that she hadn't felt in years. Their time together had been unexpected, a surprise that had caught her off guard, but it was a welcome surprise, one that had brought joy and companionship back into her life. And despite the doubts and fears that had surfaced, Maggie couldn't deny the connection she felt with him, a connection that felt genuine and real. Maggie knew that life's paths were often unpredictable, leading to places and people she never could have imagined. Tom's death had shattered her world, and for a long time she had believed that she would never find happiness again. But now, standing in the vineyard that she and Tom had built together, Maggie realized that life had a way of healing, of bringing new beginnings when she least expected them. She turned, and in the distance, she saw David walking toward her, his figure silhouetted against the setting sun. He had come to the vineyard, as he often did, to find her. Maggie watched as he approached, his step slow and measured, as if he, too, was taking in the beauty of the evening. When David reached her, he smiled, and Maggie felt her heart lift. There was something about his presence that soothed her, that made her feel that everything would be okay, no matter what happened next. "Hi," David said softly, his voice blending with the gentle rustling of the leaves. "Hi," Maggie replied, her smile warm and genuine. They stood there for a moment, neither of them speaking, just taking in the sight of the vineyard, bathed in the soft light of the setting sun. It was a peaceful, almost sacred moment, and Maggie felt a sense of calm wash over her. "Have you been out here long?" David asked, breaking the silence. "Not too long," Maggie replied. "Just thinking." David nodded, his gaze turning to the vineyard. "It's a beautiful place to think." Maggie looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt or hesitation, but all she saw was sincerity and a quiet strength that had drawn her to him from the beginning. "David," Maggie began, her voice steady, "I've been doing a lot of thinking about us, about everything that's happened." David turned to her, his expression attentive and open. "And?" Maggie took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "Isabel's involvement, it threw me off. It made me question what was real and what wasn't. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that what we have, it is real. I can feel it in here," she said, placing a hand over her heart. "And I don't want to let fear or doubt take that away." David reached out, taking her hand in his. His touch was warm, grounding her in the present moment. "Maggie, I care about you. I have from the start. Isabel may have nudged us in each other's direction, but what we've built, that's ours, no one else's." Maggie smiled, a weight lifting from her shoulders. "I believe you, David, and I want to see where this goes, wherever it may lead." David's eyes softened, and he gently squeezed her hand. "So do I, Maggie, so do I." They stood there together, hand in hand, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky awash in shades of deep purple and blue. The vineyard, now bathed in twilight, seemed to hold its breath as if acknowledging the significance of the moment. In the distance, Isabel watched from the edge of the vineyard, a content smile on her face. She had come to check on Maggie, to see if her friend was okay after their difficult conversation. But now, seeing Maggie and David together, she knew that her work was done. Maggie had found happiness again, and that was all Isabel had ever wanted. As the first stars began to twinkle in the evening sky, Maggie and David turned and began to walk back through the vineyard, their steps slow and unhurried. The autumn air was cool against their skin, but there was a warmth between them that made the world feel just a little bit brighter. Maggie glanced at David, feeling a sense of peace and hope that she hadn't felt in years. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she was ready to embrace it, knowing that she wasn't alone. Life had brought her to this moment, to this man, and she was ready to see where it would take her. As they walked together through the vineyard, the sun fully set and the stars twinkling above, Maggie knew that this was the beginning of something new, a new chapter, a new season, and perhaps a new love, and she was ready to welcome it with an open heart.